Welcome back. We now turn to just looking at the BRICS states because the BRICS states are important and useful for us to understand the ways in which globalization has had an impact on these four states, in fact, made them a little bit better, but these states still have significant amounts of inequality. As we can see from the chart over here, one would notice that, in fact, a number of states have done quite well, right? What we've seen, in that regard, is a number of states, for example, these four states, have done quite well. You see, for example, that Russia has increased its economic growth at a level of 261%, and Brazil and South Africa are near similar. India, of course, double that amount. But the key one is to see what China has been doing. And what we can see is the explosive growth of the Chinese economy. The GDP per capita in China has increased by 1,000%. So this state in this regard, as a measure of how globalization has had a positive impact, has had a tremendously positive impact on the Chinese economy, bringing and explaining to some extent in that regard how we end up with nearly 300 million people being pulled out of abject poverty and levels of poverty in China, which would not particularly be found in the West and certainly not in those numbers. So if we look further in this, we can see that amongst the BRICS, the numbers have been quite extensive in this regard. China has had 10% per year growth. It's become the number 1 exporter of goods around the world. There's no country in the world that doesn't trade with China or has shops that are filled with Chinese-produced goods or Chinese-made goods or Chinese-contributed goods as well. If you own a car, many of the components to that will probably come from China, or subcomponents to other countries like Mexico, etc., will come from China as well. India as a country has had between 4 to 7% yearly growth through the last 2 decades or so. And that, of course, is very different than what it used to have before, which would be sort of an average of 2 to 3% of growth if it did well. But it's also seen a massive amount of foreign direct investment, not only in the same way as China, where there's internal movement of capital and investment. China, of course, has seen a lot more foreign direct investment from the United States and the Western world itself, a lot of it funneled through Taiwan and Japan and elsewhere as well, that comes into the Chinese economy as intermediaries from East Asia. But India has seen a lot of foreign direct investment in the tech sector, right? Especially we've seen Indian companies in the technology sector like Wipro and Infosys, etc., but also in areas that deal with service, for example, law and customer service and so forth like that. Brazil, similarly, has seen a fairly significant growth rate of 3% on average, with the areas being oil and gas and exports. It's also produced a lot of companies that have now become direct competitors with Western companies. So, for example, Embraer, the plane manufacturer, is up against Bombardier and Airbus and others that also produce airplanes, and it has a fairly significant global footprint as well. There have been mergers, for example, Brazilian companies such as Ambev, which merged with Interbrew, with Belgium's Interbrew has become the largest liquor and beverage company in the world. We also know that the largest beef and cattle company in the world comes out of Brazil, and Brazil, of course, has Restaurant Brands International, which owns Tim Hortons and Wendy's, and is, of course, the major owner other than McDonald's, but it's a conglomerate, right? So they just own McDonald's. They own a number of different brands, Wendy's, Tim Hortons, and a bunch of others as well. So all of those operations then again come out of Brazil. So we see this growth. And we can see in Russia and South Africa as well, growth rates of 3 to 4%. A lot of it is in extractive industries, etc. But a couple of things to point out here. One, this is about providing cheap labor, say in India or China, and even in Brazil as well. It's about providing low-cost manufacturing, for example, in China and India. It's about providing subsidiary or lower and services. For example, in India, it's the tech sector, but the tech jobs there are not the 6-figure high-end jobs that you're finding in Google or Apple in North America or Western Europe. They're the lower-end sort of call center jobs, and even if they're coding jobs and whatnot, they don't pay as well, because what it would cost you to hire one, say, computer engineer in California, you could hire 3 or 4 in India or in South Africa or elsewhere. Further to that, a lot of this has to do with export of still raw materials. Russia, South Africa, India, Brazil, and even China as well. There are lots of raw minerals that are extracted and then sent to the West for technology products, silicone, etc. as well. So with that, you can see the impact in a very particular case of the BRICS, which is important for us to note, but it's also important to underline in this regard that inequality in these places is also growing as fast. So as much as they are producing more wealth overall, they also still have a problem of poverty internally, as inequality between the rich and the haves and the have-nots is growing just in the same way as it's growing in the West in an age of globalization. So thanks for engaging, and we will catch you at the next video.